They thought exile was my end. But in the heart of the blizzard, I found something the world had forgotten. A beast that was actually a king. They shouldn't have touched you, Elena. Now they'll learn why my guard is called the Onyx. But to understand how the most powerful man in the world ended up dying on my porch, we have to go back to the night the Silver Moon Pack threw me to the wolves. They said an Omega without a pack was as good as dead. When the Silver Moon Pack threw me out into the frozen mouth of the Alaskan wilderness, they expected to find a corpse by spring. Just another cautionary tale about a girl who didn't know her place. But they were wrong. I didn't die. I survived because of a monster I found bleeding in the snow. I thought I was saving a stray, a kindness in a world that had shown me nothing but cruelty. I had no idea that by saving him, I was starting a war. Because that wasn't a stray. And the 4 massive black wolves that arrived at my door 2 months later, they didn't come to kill me. They came to kneel. 60 days ago, my life didn't belong to a king. It belonged to a pack that hated me. I stood in the center of the great hall, my hands bound in silver-lined cuffs that sizzled against my skin. My father, the beta, stood 10 feet away. He wouldn't even look at me.
Look at me when I'm speaking to you, Omega.
Marcus, the Alpha's son. The man who had spent 3 years trying to break me. He stood over me, his eyes dark with the kind of malice only a rejected man can hold.
The evidence is clear, Elena. The pack crest was found in your bag. You aren't just a low-rank failure. You're a thief.
I didn't touch it, I screamed, my voice echoing off the stone walls. You put it there, Marcus. You did this because I told you I'd rather die than be your plaything.
Be careful, Elena. You're a rogue now. No one here is going to save you.
I looked at my father. Dad, please, tell them I was with you.
I have no daughter. A thorn does not steal. Take her to the border. Strip her of her coat. Let the forest decide her fate.
Stripping an Omega in November was a death sentence. It wasn't just exile. It was an execution. They threw me into the dirt at the tree line. I watched Marcus's headlights disappear into the dark, leaving me with nothing but a thin shirt and the howling void of the wilderness. I walked for miles. My lungs felt like they were filling with glass. I found the old trapper's cabin on Dead Man's Ridge by accident, a rotting shack with a door that barely held. Until the night of the first blizzard, I heard a heavy, rhythmic thud against the porch, a low, wet sound, the sound of something drowning on its own breath. I pushed the door open. There, huddled beneath the overhang, was a shape so large it didn't seem possible. A beast the size of a grizzly, its fur as black as a moonless night. He wasn't just sleeping, he was dying. Around his throat was an iron collar, glowing with a faint, toxic violet light. Royal silver. I've got you, I whispered, reaching for his matted fur. You're not dying tonight. Not on my porch.
I had to get him inside. If I left him on the porch, the Silver Moon patrols would find him, or the cold would finish what the silver started.
I grabbed his thick, matted scruff and pulled. God, he was heavy. It was like trying to move a fallen oak tree. My muscles screamed, my frozen fingers slipping against his fur as I hauled all 600 pounds of him across the threshold. I collapsed against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. In the dim light of my single oil lamp, the beast looked even more terrifying. He took up half the kitchen floor, his black fur stained with a wet metallic shimmer.
The smell hit me then, burnt hair and ozone. I knelt beside his massive neck, my breath hitching. The iron collar wasn't just tight, it was fused. The silver spikes were glowing, pulsing with a sickly violet light that seemed to be drinking his life force.
"I'm not letting them have you," I whispered, reaching for my rusted toolkit. "They took everything from me. They aren't taking you, too."
"Don't you dare," I snapped, leaning over him until our noses almost touched. "I am the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave. Now, stay still."
For a second, those golden violet eyes locked onto mine. There was an intelligence there that made my skin crawl, a power that didn't belong to a wild animal. Then, slowly, his head hit the floorboards with a heavy thud. He was letting me in. I worked like a woman possessed. I used the heavy pliers, my hands slick with his blood. Every time I moved a spike, he let out a vibration that shook the very foundation of the cabin. The collar broke. I threw the cursed thing into the corner, watching it hiss against the floorboards. But the relief didn't last. His breathing was getting worse, his chest was hitching, and the veins in his neck were turning a bruised, poisonous purple. The silver was in his blood. I knew that color. My father had used it on rogues. There was only one cure, moonshade root. And it didn't grow in the neutral zone. It grew on the northern ridge, 3 miles into Silver Moon territory. If Marcus's scouts caught me there, they wouldn't just exile me again. They'd end me. I looked at the wolf. He was dying because of the same people who broke me. That was all the reason I needed. I grabbed my cloak, wrapped a cloth around my bleeding hands, and stepped back out into the whiteout. The blizzard was a physical wall. Every step was a battle. The snow was waist-deep, pulling at my legs like lead weights. I couldn't see the stars, but I could feel the ridge. I could feel the border, a line in the dirt that felt like a tripwire.
I froze. That wasn't a lone wolf. That was a hunting party. I dropped into the snow, burying myself until only my eyes were visible. 50 yards away, 3 shadows cut through the trees, large, gray, and efficient. I saw the lead scout, the one who had laughed when Marcus slopped me. He stopped. He sniffed the air, his snout tilting toward my hiding spot. Don't breathe. Don't move. Be the snow. Be the cold.
The wind shifted, blowing my scent toward the valley. The scout chuffed and kept moving. I waited until the sound of their paws faded before I dug like a frantic animal. My fingers were blue, screaming with pain, until I felt it, the waxy, bitter leaves of the moonshade. I didn't walk back. I crawled. My vision was blurring.
the world turning gray at the edges. But I held that root against my chest like it was a diamond.
I'm coming, beast, I whispered into the wind. Just stay awake.
I don't remember hitting the floor. I just remember the smell of wet fur and the sudden, overwhelming heat of the cabin. I was shaking so hard, the moonshade root fell from my numb fingers, rolling across the floorboards like a discarded stone.
I crawled to him. My vision was swimming in gray spots, my lungs burning with every shallow breath. The beast hadn't moved. He was a statue of black marble, cold and terrifying.
Wake up, I croaked, my voice sounding like breaking glass. I didn't have the strength to boil water. I chewed the bitter, frozen root myself, ignoring the way it numbed my tongue and throat, and pressed the poultice directly into the black, jagged wound on his neck.
The moment the herbs touched his skin, the cabin didn't just get warm, it ignited. A pulse of violet light exploded from the wound, throwing me backward.
The beast's body buckled, his spine arched, his claws digging deep, splintering furrows into the wooden floor. A sound came out of him, not a growl, but a frequency so low it made the windows rattle in their frames. Elena. I froze. My heart stopped. He hadn't shifted. He was still a wolf. But his eyes, they were open now. They weren't just violet. They were burning like dying stars.
He didn't speak with his mouth. The voice was in my head, a heavy, velvet weight that made my brain ache. It was a king's voice, a voice that had never known the word please. You went back into their territory for me?
The tension in his massive body snapped. Slowly, his head drifted down, resting in my lap. The fur was soft now, the heat radiating from him so intense it began to melt the frost on my cloak.
For the first time in 2 months, I wasn't alone. I wasn't the rejected Omega. I was a protector. I felt his steady, powerful heartbeat against my legs. Thump, thump, thump. It was the most beautiful.
"Who are you?" I murmured, my fingers tangling in his black mane. "You're no stray. A stray doesn't have royal silver in his veins."
Mistake. I was a mistake. But you, Elena Thorne, you are life. He fell back into a deep sleep, but the connection didn't break. I could feel his dreams, flashes of obsidian palaces, of blood on snow, of a crown made of thorns. I didn't want to close my eyes. I wanted to stay in this moment forever, where the world was just me and the beast.
I woke up to the smell of tobacco and expensive leather. The sun was barely peeking over the ridge, casting long, bloody shadows across the cabin floor.
The door didn't just open, It was kicked. The hinges screamed as the wood splintered, and the freezing morning air rushed in like an intruder. Standing in the doorway, framed by the blinding white light, was the man who had destroyed my life.
Well, well, look at the little Omega. I expected to find a frozen corpse, Elena, but instead I find you playing house.
I stood up. I didn't reach for the fire poker this time. I stood in front of the sleeping wolf, shielding his massive body with my own. Get out of my house, Marcus.
Your house? Marcus stepped inside, his eyes landing on the beast behind me. His face went pale for a split second, then twisted into a greedy, triumphant grin. The council has been looking for a shadow wolf, a monster that escaped the king's guard. I didn't think I'd find it being nursed by a traitor. Move, Elena, or I'll have my men put a silver bullet through both of you.
Marcus took a step closer, the floorboards groaning under his heavy combat boots. He smelled of expensive cologne and blood, the scent of a predator who enjoyed the hunt too much.
You always were stubborn, Elena. It's what I liked about you. But look at you now, living in a shack, protecting a dying dog.
He's worth 10 of you, Marcus. Now get out. You're trespassing on neutral ground.
Neutral ground doesn't exist for traitors.
Marcus's hand moved faster than I could track. I hit the wall hard, the back of my head cracking against the timber. Black spots danced in my eyes as I slumped to the floor, my jaw throbbing.
Grab the wolf. If he struggles, silverbolt him. And as for the girl, maybe she needs to be reminded of what happens to Omegas who forget their place.
I tried to stand, but the room was spinning. I watched through a haze as the two guards stepped toward the black beast. They reached for their silver-lined capture nets. They were laughing. They thought it was over.
Then the air in the cabin changed. It didn't just get cold, it froze. A pressure slammed into my chest, so heavy I couldn't breathe. The wolf didn't bark, he didn't snarl. He simply opened his eyes. And this time, they weren't gold. They were a blinding, incandescent violet. You touched her. The guards froze. Marcus took a step back, his face draining of all color. What is that? It spoke. It's a shifter. I watched, paralyzed, as the wolf's body began to warp. He didn't just shift, he exploded with power. The black fur receded into tanned, scarred skin. The massive paws became hands with claws like obsidian.
In the center of my kitchen stood a man. He was tall, 7 feet of raw, lethal muscle, his back covered in the scars of 1,000 battles. He was naked, bathed in the morning light, and the sheer aura radiating from him made the Silver Moon guards drop their weapons in pure instinctual terror.
No, it can't be. The Obsidian King? You're dead. The council said you were executed.
The council lied. The king moved. He didn't run. He blurred. 1 second he was standing by the fire. The next, his hand was crushed around Marcus's throat, lifting the Alpha's son off the floor like he weighed nothing. You came into her home. You laid hands on the woman who saved my life.
Please. I didn't know. She's just an Omega. A nobody.
She is a queen, and you are dust.
The cabin felt too small for the power radiating from the man standing in my kitchen. The air hummed with the scent of ozone and ancient forest. Marcus was still gasping, his feet dangling inches off the floor as the king's grip tightened.
You're supposed to be a ghost. The silver, it should have killed you.
I should have been celebrating. I should have been cheering as Marcus finally paid for every bruise and every tear. But then I saw it. A tiny pinprick of red light dancing across the king's bare chest.
My heart stopped. I looked toward the shattered window. Far out in the tree line, buried in the whiteout of the blizzard, a flash of glass caught the morning sun. A sniper.
My heart stopped. I looked toward the shattered window. Far out in the tree line, buried in the whiteout of the blizzard, a flash of glass caught the morning sun.
A searing heat tore through my shoulder. It felt like someone had pressed a white-hot iron against my skin and twisted. The force of the bullet sent me spinning into the king's chest.
The window, I croaked, my hand clutching my shoulder as red began to bloom across my shirt. They're coming.
They will wish they had died in their sleep. The king didn't hide. He stood up, shielding me with his own body. He looked out into the forest, and the growl that left his throat wasn't human. It was a frequency that made the very glass in the windows shatter into 1,000 diamonds.
Marcus scrambled toward the door, coughing and laughing through the blood in his mouth. You're weak, King. You saved a nobody. My father's whole battalion is behind that ridge. You're trapped in a box.
I leaned against the kitchen counter, my vision blurring, but I grabbed my fire poker anyway. If this was how I died, defending a king in a rotting shack, it was a better death than the Silver Moon Pack had planned for me.
He isn't alone, Marcus, I said, my voice shaking but holding firm. He has me, and I've survived more than you could ever dream of. Be still, my brave little Omega. You have fought enough.
The sound wasn't the scouts. It wasn't the Silver Moon. These were heavy vehicles, massive, disciplined.
4 black SUVs crested the ridge, their tires churning the snow like armored beasts. They didn't slow down. They didn't stop. They slammed into the clearing, forming a perfect defensive circle around my crumbling cabin.
Wait, those aren't ours. Those are Onyx plates. Who is in those cars?
The doors opened in perfect unison. 4 men stepped out. Not just shifters, the Onyx Guard, the elite warriors of the Northern Throne. They wore black tactical gear and eyes that reflected the same violet fire as the man standing next to me.
I looked at the stray I had fed. I looked at the man who had slept in my lap.
The world had called me a reject. They had called him a monster. But the storm was just beginning.
The silence that followed the arrival of the Onyx Guard was heavier than the blizzard. The engines of the black SUVs hummed like purring predators, their headlights cutting through the snow to illuminate the carnage of my front yard.
Marcus stood frozen, his hand still reaching for the side of his neck where the king's fingerprints were bruised into his skin. His scouts, the brave warriors who had come to hunt a rogue, were now trembling so hard their rifles rattled against their tactical vests.
The lead guard stepped forward. He was a giant of a man, his face scarred and his eyes cold as the permafrost. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the sniper hiding in the trees. He looked only at the naked, scarred man standing on my porch.
Sir, the perimeter is secure. The traitorous curs have been neutralized.
Wait, sire? Traitorous curs? Do you know who I am? I am Marcus Thorne, heir to the Silver Moon. You're trespassing on—
Silence. The word wasn't a shout, it was a command that felt like a physical weight slamming into the ground. Marcus's jaw snapped shut so hard I heard his teeth click.
You spoke of laws, little Alpha. You spoke of jurisdiction. You came into this sanctuary to spill the blood of an Omega who has more honor in her discarded scraps than you have in your entire lineage.
The king took a step toward Marcus. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. With every step, the snow beneath his feet melted instantly, turning to steam.
You looked at her and saw a reject. I looked at her and saw the only soul in this God's forsaken territory worth saving. You laid hands on my savior. You drew her blood on my porch.
She's a thief. She's a rogue. My father, the Beta, he disowned her.
Then your father is a fool who has lost his greatest treasure. And you are a dead man standing.
The king turned his gaze to the onyx guard.
Kneel. In one perfectly synchronized motion, the elite warriors of the Northern Throne dropped to one knee, their heads bowed low. Long live the Obsidian King! Long live the Luna of the Ridge!
I felt the world tilt. The Luna of the Ridge? He wasn't just a king, he was claiming me. In front of the man who had tried to destroy me, the most powerful man in the world was calling me his equal.
Marcus's knees finally gave out. He collapsed into the slush, his face pale as a ghost. He looked at the king, then at the guards, and finally, he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw true, soul-deep fear in his eyes. Take them. Put them in the silver cages they brought for me. They will stand trial before the High Council. And tell the Beta of the Silver Moon that his daughter is no longer a thorn. She belongs to the North now.
The snow-covered clearing was silent as the Onyx Guard dragged Marcus toward the black SUVs. I watched them go, my body finally giving in to the cold and the blood loss. I swayed, the world turning a hazy, soft white at the edges.
Before I could hit the ground, a pair of arms, stronger than the earth itself, caught me. I looked up. The king was no longer a beast of shadow. He was a man, his violet eyes searching mine with a desperation that broke my heart.
Elena, look at me. Stay with me, my brave little wolf.
I'm tired, Draven, I croaked, my hand clutching his bare, scarred arm. I've been so cold for so long.
Never again. From this moment, you are the fire that burns at the center of my kingdom. You saved a king when he was nothing but a dying dog. Now, let the world see who you really are.
He leaned down. I felt the heat of his breath against the crook of my neck, right where the Silver Moon pact bond had been cruelly severed. The air smelled of wood smoke and cedar.
His teeth sank into my skin. It wasn't the bite of a predator. It was a claim. A flood of violet light erupted from the contact point, surging through my veins like liquid gold. The pain in my shoulder vanished. The cold in my lungs turned to a roaring furnace of power.
I gasped as the Luna mark bloomed on my skin, a black wolf howling under a violet moon. I wasn't an Omega anymore. I wasn't a reject. I was a queen of the North.
I looked at him, then at the cabin, the rotting porch where I'd fed him, the kitchen where I'd bled to save him, the only home I'd known for 2 months of hell. You don't belong in the dirt, Elena. This place is a grave. Leave the ghost of the Omega here. The Queen is coming home with me.
I took the oil lamp from the porch railing. I didn't hesitate. I threw it through the open door, watching as the flames licked the dry timber. We stood there, the king's arm wrapped around my waist, watching the cabin turn into an inferno. The smoke rose high into the Alaskan sky, a signal to the Silver Moon Pack that their victim was gone.
They thought they had thrown me to the wolves. They didn't realize I was the one leading the pack now. Let's go, Elena. We have a kingdom to reclaim and a pack to dismantle.
My name is Elena Thorne, and this was the day the world learned you never ever turn your back on an Omega who has nothing left to lose.